very long video, and I applaud you if you watch the whole thing. I'm debating whether I should present it as a single video or as a series of videos, and then maybe I'll present it as both, perhaps. I'm still debating on that. We discussed in Jewish law and Jewish philosophy, Jewish theology, Jewish ideology, Torah, which means Torah ideology. I don't mean on a ethnic scale, I mean on a religious scale. The question of the village of Kiryas and their various other municipal functions, such as the school district, the library, secession, the fire department, things like that. And the question is, of course, the Kiryas follows the ideology of the Satmar Rebbe, which is anti-Zionist, which is really the old originalist Torah ideology, theology. How is it possible that that such a thing is even allowed in Jewish law to have a village like this? And we answered that in the last video, and you can watch that video. The next question is, what about American law? Isn't there separation of church and state? How can you have what some have called a village theocracy? Now, the first answer to that is, and that should also be the last answer to that, is that Kiryas is not a village theocracy. As much as the propagandists have tried to brand it as such, and yes, there have been strife over the years among the various communities that reside in Kiryas, it is clearly not a village theocracy. I will demonstrate this with a joke that's unfortunately very true. The way I heard the joke was about the Christians, but it could just as well be said about Jews. So, this fellow, he was walking along, he saw someone was falling off a bridge, and he ran, and he grabbed him by the hand and lifted him up to save him, and they saved his life, and he's like, brother, friend, tell me, are you religious? He said, and so the man who he saved said, yes, I'm religious. He said, oh, are you a Jew or a Christian? He said, I'm a Christian. It would work just the same to say he was a Jew. I'll just go by the way the joke was told. He said, oh, are you Catholic or are you Protestant? He said, oh, I'm Protestant. He said, oh, are you, what denomination? And just like me, every time he said, oh, I'm also Christian, oh, I'm also Protestant. You know, he said, oh, what denomination? I'm Presbyterian. Oh, me too, I'm also Presbyterian. And he's telling the story over to someone else about how he saved this man's life. He said, are you from the Presbyterian Western Schism or the Northern Schism? Well, there's no such thing, I'm just making up. And he said, oh, I'm from the Western Schism. And then this man, being from the Northern Schism, telling over the story, said, and then I pushed the heathen back into the river so he could drown. And the same thing we have in our communities. And sometimes it happens, and it's totally wrong, and it's sinful. But we see, the closer you get, the more difficult sometimes it is when you have differences. Meaning, are you Jew or Gentile? I'm Jewish. Are you religious? I'm religious. Are you Orthodox, Reform, Conservative? I'm Orthodox. Are you modern? You're Haredi? I'm Haredi. Are you Litvish, Hasidish? I'm Hasidish. What are you? Satmar, Baba, Vision? I'm Satmar. Are you Aroni or Azali? Ooh. Someone who would never fight against a modern Orthodox Jew or a Reform Jew would fight Aronim and Zalonim, which is, of course, very wrong. And of course, it would be wrong for him to fight the modern Orthodox or Reform or anybody, or the Gentile or anybody. We should all get along. Quite often, the closer next to you is just in nature that we have to overcome, that it's much more difficult. People often ask me, what if I want to open a church in Kiryas Joel? What if I want to open a Buddhist temple? There would be no one could stop you, because, but the only reason it doesn't exist there is the same reason why there's no Hasidic synagogue in Pocatello, Idaho. Because there's no Hasidic Jews there. Why there's no synagogue, Orthodox synagogue in the whole state, I think, of South Dakota. I don't remember, it's North Dakota or South Dakota. One of those has a distinction of being the only state in the Union to not have a rabbi at all, not even Reformed conservative. I don't remember offhand which one it is. One of the Dakotas, they say maybe there's 300 Jews in the whole state that identify as Jewish. It's a very small group, and so therefore there's not enough money to hire a rabbi, anything. There are a few lay-led liberal congregations there, and that's it. And so the reason why there's no Catholic Church in Kiryas Joel at the moment is because there's not enough people who want it. And also those who do can drive. Usually most of them would drive, and they could drive into Monroe and go to the Sacred Heart. Or whatever church or they want to attend. Just because people don't exist there, but nobody's prevented from living there. And the proof for this is in this, what I said. The closer the schisms are, the more the fight is. And so within Kiryas Joel, the schism exists between the various groups, and there are many synagogues in Kiryas Joel whose raison d'etre is to oppose not only the main rabbi of the main synagogue in Kiryas Joel, but to oppose the whole existence of the village of Kiryas Joel, to oppose the school district and so forth, as we discussed before. And it's totally in their right. And yes, they've had fights, both, unfortunately, it sometimes got physical, and that's extremely sinful, and the Rebbe vehemently opposed to that. And there have also been political and legal battles as well. But they live side by side within 3 blocks, small blocks. You have 3 synagogues of the 3 different factions in Kiryas Joel, the biggest 3 factions, and all of those are within 3 blocks of each other, and I've seen people who attend all 3. And I know people who attend all 3. I myself, I taught in the Kiryas Joel school district, and not in the school district, in the yeshiva, in UTA, which is the main faction, the largest faction school. I was an English teacher there, and that's the main school, and one of the teachers there who taught together with me was a member in the opposition synagogue, and I see him there all the time. So if these 3 exist all together, then absolutely there would be much more opposition to any of these than there would be to a Buddhist temple or a Catholic church or something popping up on the street. That wouldn't be any of their business. In Williamsburg, there's churches. In Borough Park, there are churches. Nobody bats an eyelid. In Muncie, there are churches. That's how it is. And if that would happen in Kiryas Joel, if enough people moved in and they wanted to build it, no one would stop them. Some people might not like it, but tough. We live in a free that's how it is. And for sure, the village would not stop it. And for sure, if a new town were formed, I don't think there are any churches within the bounds, but I am pretty sure there is a non-Jewish cemetery within the bounds of the new town, if I'm not mistaken, or nearby. Of course they'd be welcome. And there are currently non-Jews who live in Kiryas Joel, many non-Jews who work in Kiryas Joel. Just the other day I was in Kiryas Joel. I saw a car, had a big statue of Mary on the dashboard, crosses all over. Nobody bats an eyelid. I've seen in Kiryas Joel, I remember I saw a girl. She was visiting from the Yiddish farm in Goshen. And many people in the Yiddish farm in Goshen have a very good friendship with Kiryas Joel. And this young woman, not only was she wearing pants and short sleeve shirt, but she was wearing tzitzis. She was wearing on top of her shirt the fringed garment that Orthodox Jewish men wear and Hasidic men wear on top of their garment, on top of their shirts. And in general, Orthodox women do not do so, although there's nothing particularly in Jewish law which would necessarily prohibit it, except that it's a man's garment. If it was a woman's garment, there would be absolutely no prohibition. It's just not done. And it would just seem arrogant to do so, but it's not a sin. Except perhaps a sin of arrogance, according to some opinions. If someone walked like that into Crown Heights, which is supposed to be open-minded, I wouldn't be surprised if they would at least have someone come over to them and explain to them that that's inappropriate. In Kiryas Joel, I remember it was in the Grand Food Market, or maybe it was in Landau's, it was one of the big supermarkets. Nobody batted an eye, and I just said hello and asked where are you from. That's how I knew she was from the Yiddish farm, because I asked her where's she coming from, and I know them in the Yiddish farm, nice people. Might not agree with everything they do, but they're wonderful people, and we get along well with them. And there is 100% there's freedom of religion in Kiryas Joel. And so these claims, and furthermore, like I said, and that's one of the oppositions that people had to the school district. The school district is totally secular. There are not even mezuzahs on the doors, which is painful for the people there to not have the mezuzahs on the doors. But out of the interest of the perception that many people have that there exists separation of church and state, they respect that. And so, since it's a government institution, there are no mezuzahs on the doors of the public school in Kiryas Joel. And no religious classes are taught during school time. I don't even know if there are any religious classes taught on the premises. I really don't know. There's only about I don't know, less than 200, maybe between 100 and 200 kids in the whole school. It's a very small school. I don't really know what their curriculum is, but I know that it's totally secular. Whatever is paid for by taxpayer money is secular. Things like buses and secular books and computers, those are paid with tax money, and even in the yeshivas, as is the law in New York State. The question comes up about separation of church and state. What is it? Where does this come from? Where does this idea come from? How did this get introduced as being perceived as the law of the land? This is, and I've seen videos about this on YouTube, which have discussed this question. at some depth, but it is what it is. So let's address this question. Does the Constitution teach us that there's separation of church and state? And of course, if we're just talking about the Constitution as a document alone, of course the Constitution does not have the words separation of church and state. Those words do not appear anywhere in the Constitution. The source of that words is that there was a letter, that private letter from Thomas Jefferson, a series of correspondence from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Church. The Danbury Baptists were concerned that their religious freedoms would be trampled upon by Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson was our third president. He was one of the first to come up with the idea of religious freedom as a fundamental in the United States. He fought for it very much. He introduced it in Virginia. And Thomas Jefferson was generally viewed by many people, by religious people, particularly in the United States, as a heathen, because he was not an Orthodox Christian. I don't mean Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. That's not with a big O. I mean, he didn't accept the ideas of Christian Orthodoxy, but rather saw Jesus as a teacher as opposed to as a divine being. And in his own personal Bible, he went ahead and removed all of the divine attributes of Jesus, and maintained Jesus as only a teacher, a figure like Buddha, and later, of course, they made Buddha into something divine, which he never intended. And he felt that this was never intended to be published. This was his own private devotional Bible. He was certainly a man of devotion, but he was not the mainstream Christian in his theology. And many people erroneously believed, because, of course, within the United States at the time, there was the strict interpretation of the Constitution and the loose interpretation. And so Jefferson believed in a strict interpretation, and Hamilton and others believed in the loose interpretation. The Federalists were more in the loose interpretation, and the Jeffersonian approach was a strict interpretation, although he didn't always live up to it. Obviously, with the Louisiana Purchase being a major example of that. So anyway, they were afraid. They applied the loose interpretation tactics, which many of the clergy, particularly, the mainstream clergy, the Episcopalian clergy, and so forth, the mainline clergy were not in line with Jefferson. They were in line with and Adams, and they were more loose interpretation of the Constitution. And so they were afraid that Jefferson would apply that. Now that's because his ideology is opposed very much consider him, quote-unquote, an honorary Muslim, even though, of course, in the Barbary Wars he fought against the Barbary pirates, Muslim terrorists. But talking from a moderate Islamic stance, Jefferson's view of Jesus was basically the Muslim view of Jesus. As a teacher, maybe a prophet, but not as a divine being. Maybe even as Messiah, as the Muslims believe. Of course, Jews don't believe anything. He's not part of our canon at all, Jesus. But this is just we're just discussing history and comparative religion here. So the Danbury Baptists were afraid that with a man like Jefferson in the White House, they would lose their religious freedoms. And Jefferson answered that the Constitution provides us a wall of separation between church and state. And that's where the term comes from. But once again, he was replying to a church that was afraid that the state was going to attack it, not that the church was going to take over the state. Furthermore, let's look at Jefferson's own way, although of course Jefferson is an enigmatic figure because he does have certain inconsistencies, but those inconsistencies are very rare, even though they're very marked and powerful. Even within the inconsistencies, one can often find a certain measure of consistency if you really study Jefferson sincerely and with an open mind and not just accept the propaganda that's been spewed against him. Now, that being said, so Jefferson, he wrote to the Danbury Baptists, there's a wall of separation between church and state. They were writing to him as he became president. Now, as the president of the United States, Jefferson broke with the precedent of the previous two presidents. There were only two presidents under the constitutional government, two executive branch presidents before him, of course. Before him was Adams, and before him was Washington. And the precedent that Washington established, that Adams followed as well, and Adams was a deeply religious man, and he raised his son John Quincy Adams. Basically, John Quincy Adams strongly believed that the United States was a Christian country, as is very evident from his writings. In any event, Washington and Adams both, and of course, it would seem obvious that Jefferson did not believe that. Washington and Adams both made Thanksgiving proclamations as president, beseeching the people to offer their thanks and worship to Almighty God. And to attend their house worship, which is for these occasions, exhorting the public to do so. And so, even in a non-denominational sense, Washington and Adams both saw their role as somewhat a role of religious leadership. And Jefferson never, as President of the United States, he never did anything like that. No Thanksgiving proclamations, nothing like that. However, as the governor of Virginia, he did issue such proclamations. So it's not that Jefferson was in any way opposed to the content of such a proclamation, but he felt, as a believer in states' rights, that was an issue on the state level and not on a federal level. And so as an executive of the state, he did see his role in the way that Washington and Adams saw as president, which he did not see as, which Jefferson only saw as governor and not as president. That is a glaring issue, and it's in view of the fact that when the First Amendment was ratified with the Establishment Clause, that Congress shall not establish official religion, and nor shall they stand in the way of the free exercise thereof. The First Amendment, freedom of religion, that was established in the Constitution when that amendment was ratified. And for many years afterwards, several of the states had an official state religion, as did municipalities. That's a historical fact. And by virtue of the fact that that was not abrogated by the ratification of the First Amendment, those states which ratified the First Amendment, many of them still had a state religion. They offered religious freedom and tolerance to other religions that were not the official religion, but there was an official state religion, as many municipalities had. And this was seen as part of federalism, that the states had rights that the federal government did not. Meaning the federal government had no right to make one official national church, the way that there's a Church of England, the way that the official Church of Italy is the Catholic Church, and so forth. And that, there are various, and there's the Russian Orthodox Church, the official Church of Russia, the way that unfortunately Israel has their chief rabbinate as the official chief rabbinate of the state of Israel, and unfortunately they have Judaism as the official national religion, which goes against Judaism. So it's a contradiction, b'nei uvei. Mysterium b'nei uvei. It's an internal and self-contradictory contradiction, but they don't care because they just changed Judaism to their own thing. In any event, all that the First Amendment ever addressed was that there should not be official state religion. That's what the Establishment Clause means. And Jefferson himself, it would seem, admits to that in the fact that he did not make Thanksgiving proclamations as president, but he did as governor, that a state, and of course if a state has these rights, the local municipalities also have such rights. There's absolutely no prohibition in the originalist approach to the Constitution against having a village theocracy. It would be totally 100% constitutional under the original intent of the framers of the Constitution, even though Jefferson was not one of the authors of the First Amendment, but his influence was very clear in it, in his proclamation of religious freedom, which predated it in Virginia. And that's basically, that was the law, that the states and municipalities could have official religions. Only the national government was not allowed to. That's the original view of the Constitution, and that's borne out by the framers and the authors of the First Amendment, as well as we can see comparing their other writings. So how did things change? Now, as we know, Franklin Roosevelt was a progressive, Wilsonian progressive. He wasn't as racist as Wilson, but he embraced many of his progressive views that went and smacked in the face of the Constitution. Wilson was the first one to say the Constitution is a living and breathing document, which is poppycock. The Constitution can only change by virtue of an amendment. There were many amendments in his stay that were ratified. But judicial review was never intended to be legislation from the bench. It's only a question as to whether legislation is constitutional. And in general, judicial review was meant to be referring to national laws that Congress made, not local and state. They have their own courts to decide in their own constitutions. However, FDR, he tried to pack the courts, and he was stopped from doing that initially. However, serving 4 terms, 3 full terms, and a brief beginning to a 4th term as president, he was able to place many of his appointees, unfortunately, into the Supreme Court. And that was a radical transformation of America. And although there were horrors of judicial review before that, and Jefferson himself was scared to death when Marbury versus Madison happened, was he recognized the importance of a certain amount of judicial review. But he was scared to death that it would be a slippery slope to what he called a tyrannical oligarchy of the judiciary, which it has become today, unfortunately. And we see, frighteningly, it has become really markedly since FDR. And so shortly after FDR, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important right now that we defeat the self-proclaimed early 20th century progressive Hillary Clinton, the Wilsonian Hillary Clinton. Because what kind of people is she going to put into the courts? It's scary. It means the end of America. And as bad as Trump is, he has said he's going to put men and women, or whatever they are, transgender, whatever they are, he's going to put people, human beings, like Antonin Scalia, and not people like, Sotomayor, and these type of people. Sotomayor, who says, we should throw out the American Constitution and adopt the South African Constitution. What a traitor! That's treason to say that. We need the Constitution has a way of being amended. It's meant to be able to be amended through the amendment process, not through judicial review. You're not supposed to let Mrs. Sotomayor. In any event, but obviously Hillary is going to put these type of people in, and so that's why it's so imperative that we have to hold our nose and vote for Trump, because Hillary is so dangerous, because these are lifetime appointments. If there's anything that needs to be amended, it's perhaps the lifetime appointments of the Supreme Court. Maybe make them terms, make the Supreme Court term, perhaps. Now, that being said, in 1947, a case came before the Supreme Court, and it was actually brought initially by the Ku Klux Klan, which is, of course, the militant arm of the Democratic Party. Always has been, and really essentially still is. And there have been people in the Ku Klux Klan who have come out for Hillary. People don't know it, it's been covered up, but it's true. The Ku Klux Klan is inexorably connected with the Democratic Party and to fight against the Republican Party. And so now the Democrats have changed their methods by, instead of the way that they've been doing it for years, fighting directly, they've enslaved the people who they want to enslave in an indirect way, and instead of labor, they're getting votes, but their lives have been made miserable by the Democratic Party. In any event, we see that what happened was the Ku Klux Klan at that point was also expanded their hate, and they wanted to fight against the Catholics. And there was, in 1947, an anti-Catholic sentiment in the Ku Klux Klan, and their goal was that the state of New Jersey should not be using public school buses for Catholic schools, or for any private religious schools, but particularly the Ku Klux Klan was upset about the Catholic schools. And I'm sure they would feel the same way about the yeshivas. As we see now in New Jersey, there's controversy over busing to the yeshivas. Now, at that point, although the court did not find the busing to be in violation of what they call the separation of church and state, the court voiced their opinion that there is a separation of church and state that is not only on the federal level, but extends to the state and even local municipal levels as well. This is totally erroneous, and this is because FDR succeeded in packing the courts. This was shortly after FDR left this world, and he filled it with his progressive judges who don't care about the Constitution and wanted to reinterpret it in their own way, illegally and totally wrongly. But that's unfortunately what happened. And so they put this into the parlance of America, and ever since then, it led to the removal of prayer in public school, which is a direct cause of all the violence and school shootings that was unheard of in the old days. In the old days, in the schools, every kid had a gun, and no one ever thought to shoot another kid or to shoot a teacher. That never happened. They all had guns in many schools, and there was no violence. It was safe. But because they took out prayer, because they're teaching the naturalistic ideas, evolution, which teaches people that they're just animals and that they don't have to answer to God, they don't have a conscience, they don't have a soul, turns them into animals. That being said, let's go further. Now, so that is the source of the idea. Really, anybody who says they believe that separation of church and state applies to states and municipalities is not only ignorant, but they're embracing the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan. They're basically Klansmen. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that's the truth. That's history. And people should be more knowledgeable of American history and realize that. Or at least, at the very least, they're embracing a Ku Klux Klan ideology, which is the ideology of the Democratic Party, the ideology of the racist and liberal progressive movement. It always has been. And I think a lot of people who act like sheep and blindly vote for these parties because they have been fooled by their propaganda really should wake up and realize, and that's including in my own community as well. I mean, we see in Rockland County who was fighting against the Orthodox Jews. All Democrats. Zabrowski, Jaffe, the self-hating Jew. Who's the other one? Another one. All three of them are Democrats, because the Democrat Party is the Ku Klux Klan Party. But in any event, this idea that separation of church and state applies to local, municipal, or even to the state level, and goes any further than the federal level is totally ignorant and wrong. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has been packed with these people. We had one lion of the court, Antonin Scalia, who I eulogized in another video. You should check out that video. Who recognized, he said, this is ridiculous. When they fought against when it came to Supreme Court against the Kiryas School District, they said this Grand Rabbi of Satmar must be amazed to hear that these litigants believe that the official religion of the United States is Satmar Hasidim. That doesn't make any sense. But that's what the First Amendment talking about, is the official's national religion, not the local municipal. In any event, they worked it out, and it's not a theocracy. It definitely isn't. But if it were, there'd really be nothing wrong with it legally and constitutionally. And it's unfortunate. They should have really fought it, and that's why we need originalists on the court who will uphold the Constitution and not interpret it in their own ways and not legislate from the bench. Alright, please like, share, and subscribe if you liked. Feel free to comment. I look forward to hearing. God bless. Take care.